This season is brought to you by Plugra Butter, a premium European-style butter made using a slow churn process. Look for Plugra wherever fine butters are sold.
No wrinkles, no coming apart at the seams.
Yeah, this is my goal for the next year.
I missed the boat on both of those. I could have used this advice a long time ago. From King Arthur Baking Company, this is Things Bakers Know. I'm David Tamarkin, King Arthur's editorial director.
And I'm Jessica Badalona, staff editor at King Arthur Baking. David, I have a funny story to tell you that relates to today's episode.
Okay. I hope it's funny. You set it up as funny. I hope it is.
Is it funny? Actually, I don't know if funny is the right word. I have this old car. It's a 1974 Mercedes 450 SLC. I can't really explain why I bought this car. Midlife crisis? Maybe. But I bought this car when I was living in San Francisco. One day, I was driving in Hayes Valley, and I was turning the corner, and all of a sudden, I'm rear-ended with my children in the back seat. We're all fine, because one thing I will say about these old Mercedes is that they're built like tanks.
This story is not funny so far.
Well, I'm getting to the funny. I'm using air quotes, the funny part. So I pull over, and again, kids are fine. I'm fine.
Oh.
But I look in my rearview mirror just in time to see this black BMW flee the scene, basically. This guy,
really? It was a hit and run?
Yeah, he hits us.
Oh, my God.
And then he drives away. And what's most notable about this BMW, as I see it speeding away, is that it has a vanity plate.
Uh-huh.
And the vanity plate reads DANTAT.
Dantat. Okay.
But unfortunately for the driver, I know the phrase Dantat, DANTAT, as the name of one of my very favorite things to buy at a Chinatown bakery.
Oh.
So Dantat is another name for those egg tarts that you get at Chinatown bakeries that have the super flaky lard crust and the really eggy, not too sweet custard in it. And this is only relevant because, say, if it had been a sequence of 7 numbers as he drove off, there is no way I would have remembered his license plate number, right?
Of course not. Yeah.
But a vanity plate, and particularly a food vanity plate, of course, lodged immediately in my memory. And so I watched him drive away, and I just had this feeling of calm smugness, because the next thing I did was call my insurance company, and they were able to find him, and they were able to make him pay for all the repairs to my car.
And do you visit him in jail every year just to kind of...
I bring him egg tarts in prison every year.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think the point is today we're going to be talking about the better Dantat, right? Not the vanity plate version. We're talking about the real thing.
One nice thing about me and this driver is that we obviously share an enthusiasm for the baked goods that you find in the bakeries of American Chinatowns. And that's the subject. We took the long way around the barn, but that's the subject of today's episode.
It is. And I'm really excited about this episode because I am such a huge fan of Chinatown bakeries. And, you and I are lucky to have lived, during the course of our lives in places with really amazing Chinatowns. That horrible story took place in wonderful San Francisco, which has one of the best Chinatowns in America, for sure, right?
Yeah.
And I live in New York City, where I think that we have a better Chinatown.
Oh, wow.
I don't know.
Okay.
We'll see. I don't know. This is not the Jess-opinion segment, so I'm not going to go there.
And part of the reason we wanted to talk about the bakeries of Chinatown today is that today is the start of the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is a significant holiday in the Chinese calendar. And it's a time of family reunions, of moon observations, but also a time to eat special foods, including moon cakes, which are a special pastry that you find in Chinatown bakeries typically only at this time of year. So we thought we would talk about those and all the other amazing baked goods that you find in a Chinatown bakery today.
Today we're going to be talking to Kristina Cho, author of 2 cookbooks. But first, I'm going to make you listen to me pontificate about why I love these bakeries so much. The first wave of Chinese immigrants to the United States began in the 1850s when laborers came to work on the Transcontinental Railroad. And later, they came just like a lot of other people for the California Gold Rush. And during that time, they established neighborhoods in many American cities, New York, where I live, San Francisco, and they started businesses, including restaurants and, of course, bakeries. And the bakeries began by selling steamed buns and other baked goods. But over time, they expanded their repertoire to include Western-style cakes. And today, most bakeries in Chinatowns sell a huge array of things: cakes, cookies,
astonishing array.
Buns, all of it.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, that neither one of us are Asian, but we have a lot of passion and enthusiasm for these baked goods just because of the sort of breadth and variety and just like the pure deliciousness. So I'm glad we got Kristina on the episode later to talk to us about the recipes, about her family's history of immigration and her relationship as an Asian American to these bakeries and these baked goods. It felt like a nice moment to look sort of outside the tradition of European baking because there is such a rich culture of baking and of specific recipes that often don't get as much attention as Western or Eastern European style bakes.
Although I do feel like that's beginning to change. I feel like so much of the exciting baking in New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago right now has an East Asian influence. A lot of bakers are really exploring those flavors and doing really exciting things. And there's a real appetite for them, which is why we're doing this episode, because you and I have an appetite for those things.
We sure do. I have a favorite thing that I always get at any Chinatown bakery that I go to, which are the cocktail buns, which is a very sweet, fluffy dough. And then inside of it is this paste made of butter and shredded unsweetened coconut and sugar. And I just love those. I will always get one of those. I'll always get an egg tart if there is an egg tart, but I always will get a coconut bun. Do you have a favorite?
Well, it's not that, because I just can't do the coconut thing.
Really? You don't like coconut?
You talk about coconut on this podcast a lot. And I've been biting my tongue, but now it's time for me to tell you that I'm just not a coconut guy.
Really?
I mean, hate is not, I don't hate it, but like I'm never going to choose it. So when I'm in a Chinatown bakery, if I'm choosing a bun, I'm probably going for the pineapple bun, which for those who don't know, has a crackling top on it, which is the signature because that's what makes it look like a pineapple. Sometimes it has, pastry cream or a different type of filling in it. But what's crucial is that it has that top.
Because it doesn't actually have any pineapple fruit in it.
No pineapple in the pineapple bun. It's just aesthetics that gives it the name. And, sometimes I get the roast pork bun, even though I pretend to be vegetarian. And
that's my kid's favorite.
Yeah. But I actually knew you were going to ask me this question. So this past weekend, I spent a lot of time in New York City's Chinatown. And I discovered something about myself, which is it's not the buns that I love the most. It's not the chiffon cakes, even though I love all that. It's really the egg tarts, it's, and at most Chinatown bakeries, you have to make a choice between the Hong Kong style egg tart, which is a short crust, or a sort of puff crust. It's a different type of puff pastry than European puff pastry, but with a very smooth, very beautiful, sunny yellow egg filling. And then the Macau or Portuguese style, which is more burnished, has a darker bake. And a different set to the custard, too.
And that is such an interest. Like, we could spend a whole episode this could be an egg tart episode, honestly. It would be you, me, and that BMW driver just breaking it down. Right. But I think it's really interesting to think about those two styles because I think they represent what has happened, which is, of course, like colonization has changed every place in the world. But in particular, you see the Portuguese influence on these egg tarts.
Yeah, Chinese puff pastry, traditional Chinese puff pastry is so interesting to me because instead of using butter, they use lard. And instead of using a butter block or a lard block, just a solid block of fat, like French puff pastry does, it's a really fatty dough laminated with a leaner dough, which honestly sounds, I haven't tried it, but it sounds easier and better to me. And the result is wonderful. I mean, it's such a flaky tart with a lot of great structure, beautiful browning sometimes if you're doing the Macau style.
And we have a recipe by Genevieve Yang for Hong Kong style egg tarts on the website. The head note of that recipe acknowledges the typical dough process, but we sort of streamlined it for home bakers, and we use a rough puff that has butter and heavy cream, so it's a little bit easier to deal with at home. And, when I look at Kristina's book, she has the classic pineapple buns, she has the cocktail buns, she has the egg tarts in there, but she also has like a peanut butter and jelly bun. She also has like an everything bagel bun that's stuffed with cream cheese. And so I think she is also playing with it. And to me, that is almost the very definition of American baking today. Because, you have all these disparate influences, all these various pastry techniques, And then this sort of out of that grows something kind of wholly new. And it's really exciting because I think, it's not as though we are like discovering any of these things, certainly not. But I think these are flavors and ingredients that are becoming like more mainstream and that you're finding in more places. And that is really compelling to me.
I like the way you put that.
Thank you.
I think that's really nice. And you know what? There's a reason why Kristina Cho could do that. And it's because she's from Cleveland. So shout out to Ohio Bakers. I can't wait to hear your conversation with Kristina.
Kristina Cho is an award-winning cookbook author, food stylist, and photographer. Her groundbreaking debut cookbook, Mooncakes and Milk Bread, won her 2 James Beard Awards and was described as an instant classic by the New York Times. She is also the author of the recent cookbook, Chinese Enough, full of home-style recipes for noodles, dumplings, stir-fries, and more. It's such a treat for me. Well, I'm so glad you could come on the podcast because I feel like when I was thinking about who had the expertise to talk to us about, the bakeries of Chinatown and specifically the baked goods in those bakeries, it was a really very obvious choice of who to call. So I'm glad that you took our call and that you came on the podcast.
Of course. It's a great honor. I love being that person in people's minds, I guess. Like, who loves a bun? Kristina,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think that just speaks to the power of your book. And in fact, I was telling our producer, I got a history degree from college, and my focus was actually on Chinese history. So when I reached out to my former advisor as we were working on this episode, just to get some background about, baking in China, he was like, every person I talk to mentions this woman, Kristina Cho. You should talk to her. I was like, yes. So I knew we were on the right track. I would love to talk for a minute about the breadth and depth of the baked goods that you find in a typical Chinatown bakery, because it's kind of astonishing, the variety. And maybe also for people who have never had the opportunity to go into a Chinese bakery, it might be nice for our listeners just to hear tactically, how do you navigate a Chinese bakery?
Sure.
Because it's different than a Western bakery.
Absolutely. I'll paint the picture of a typical typology of a bakery. And I do want to preface this that the Chinese bakeries that I think we're talking about and that I write about in the book really focus on Hong Kong style, Chinese American, a lot of Southern Chinese influence. When you think about the bread of all Chinese baking, it's huge. And this book really only covers this small subset in a way, but there's still so much in there.
Yeah.
So when you go to the bakery, you'll probably see some display cakes in the window. They'll be covered in cream and shiny fruit. There'll be a bunch of cakes, probably some cheesecakes too, and rolled cakes, which are sponge cakes that have a layer of cream and you roll it up. And then there will be sweet and savory buns that are toasty, golden brown, shiny. Everything needs to be shiny, to be appealing. And they're twisted in all these different shapes. You'll probably find a bolo bao, which is a pineapple bun. It's one of the most iconic buns at a Chinese bakery. There's no pineapple in it. There's this cake, this is Swiss roll that has pork floss and green onions in it, but it's the base of it is still a sponge cake. And it's not my favorite thing, but it has a uniqueness to it that I kind of like.
What is your favorite thing?
Oh, so many things. So my favorite sweet bun is gaimei bao, or you would call it a cocktail bun.
Oh, yeah.
It has 2 lines of piping on top. That's how you can tell it's distinctively a cocktail bun. And then the inside is a mixture of coconut, sugar, milk powder, butter. It's just it tastes like buttery, sugary, sweet goodness.
It's my favorite too. You have great taste.
Yeah, it's really great.
So good.
It always reminds me of an almond croissant, how you would take this ranch pan, kind of filling and stuff inside of an old croissant. This one you're using fresh dough, but I think back in the day, the reason there was a theory that it was called a cocktail bun because they would take all the leftover bits. That's why there's just bits of butter, bits of sugar, coconut, the leftover ingredients, and make this cocktail of filling and stuff it in whatever dough they had left over.
So I say call it a cocktail rather than a floor sweepings or,
scrappy buns. Yeah.
You started out not thinking that you were going to be a recipe developer or a food writer. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. I have not gone to culinary school. I've never full on worked at a restaurant other than being a waitress. I have a background in architecture and interior design, so I'm professionally trained that way. To be fair, though, I've always had food, baking, just cooking for people in the back of my brain. It was always just part of my life. I grew up in a Chinese American restaurant. I wrote a little bit in the book about how my grandpa's first kitchen job when he immigrated to the United States was to bake almond cookies and probably also
Yeah.
like wash dishes. Like those were very like
Right.
lower end tiers, you know? And so in a way, like there's a little bit of a baking history there. I grew up always wanting to be a home baker and home cook and not never really thought of myself as a professional. But at the same time, I think my architectural mindset really allows me to really deep dive and figure out how things work, why they work. And there's a lot of like research into architecture too, in addition to being creative.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's maybe not so far afield.
Yeah.
But I want to talk to you a little bit about your family's background, which you write about in the book. So your grandparents came to the United States in the 1960s, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the late 60s.
And did they settle in right in Cleveland? Because that's where you grew up.
So my grandparents actually lived in Chicago for about a year. So my grandparents came with their 5 children, also my grandpa's mom. So it was like a family of 8. And they were in like a very small apartment in Chicago because there was such a network of other Chinese immigrants there. That's kind of how my
Yeah.
grandpa got connected. But then there's also another network of Chinese American immigrants in the Cleveland area. And then he moved over there. It's only a 6-hour drive. Like someone who owns a restaurant, they kind of, you know, in a way help sponsor and bring other people to come and give them a job for them to start a life. But there was definitely enough of a network there for my family to feel safe and in a way supported. And all of my grandma's and my grandma and my grandpa's friends were living along the same block or a block over. And so I remember love going on walks with them. And you can see like winter melon, Asian vegetables growing on the fences and stuff like that. Like you could feel that there was like a community here.
Yeah. And especially when you look at San Francisco or you look at New York, like the history of Chinese restaurants in both of those places is much longer. You know, it's in the late 1800s, in that sort of first wave of immigration.
For sure.
There are these Chinese restaurants, some of which I think are still around in some form today. When I was looking into the start of Chinese bakeries in America, it seems like they are sort of a later addition. Even Eastern Bakery, which I think is one of the oldest ones in San Francisco, is not that old.
They maybe had celebrated their 100-year anniversary a couple years ago. So that one technically is the oldest one. But I'm curious what the offering that they had at 100 years or 100 years ago. Like maybe it was more like very traditional stuff like moon cakes, maybe these like kind of flaky pastries. Because I think of a little bit more contemporary style of baking is where you see things like pineapple buns.
Sure.
And it's contemporary, but it's still, that has been around maybe since like the 60s or 70s, you know, but it's not 100 years old.
Well, and let's talk about that because I think that's really interesting because, yes, if you go to any bakery in almost any Chinatown in America today, you're going to see more or less the same selection of items.
Yes, absolutely.
But you say in your book, and I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about the sort of introduction of kind of Western style desserts is a relatively modern addition to a Chinese bakery.
Yeah. I like to equate it to it was just part of the evolution of Chinese American baking, or more so like I take it back to Hong Kong style bakeries. Researching this book, I was just talking to my dad about it because my dad, also born and raised in Hong Kong, he lived there until his late 20s before meeting my mom and moving to the United States. And I was like, what was it like going to bakeries like back then? Like, what would you call them? And he said everyone called that style of bakery a Western bakery. And in America, the same type of bakery that offers the same exact things. In America, we call it a Chinese bakery. You know, so there's this really interesting convergence of, I think, definitions and how we see culture kind of shifting in a way, the stuff that we see and what we consider a classic Chinese American bakery, that like Chinese and Western influence together, especially in Hong Kong, because they had so much European influence, especially from the UK. You see things like those like chiffony cream cakes, you know, and like there's also the shared love of tea and biscuits, kind of like these more crumbly cookies, you know, like you see a lot of similarities there. But then it was just Chinese bakers that kind of decided to make use of what they had access to, use flavors and ingredients that they could access in Hong Kong, in Asia. And the same could be said about bakers in the United States.
And I think it's worth noting that most homes in Hong Kong, at least, probably up until more modern times, did not have ovens. So you talk in your
even
book,
still now, I think maybe a toaster oven at most.
Oh, nice. But I think that's sort of interesting because you talk in your book about how these bakeries, not only are making delicious things to eat, but they serve as community hubs. And I think that, I don't know, I'd be curious to know if you think that's true even in the States.
I think for sure, absolutely, especially in San Francisco. I was just thinking about it a few weeks ago when I went into San Francisco Chinatown. And the plaza that's in Chinatown that has all the old men playing mahjong or they're gambling, the main square in Chinatown where there's a lot of the uncles, aunties. It's like almost their third space. But I remember also living off Clement Street in Inner Richmond, and I would walk by Red Eye Bakery, Cherry Blossom Bakery, and in the mornings, there's just people in there chatting, catching up on their day at like 8 o'clock in the morning, So I think it's always been like that.
Yeah.
And for that generation, probably younger generations too.
This episode is going to air at the start of the Mid-Autumn Festival. You have a recipe and you talk a fair amount about mooncakes and the role of mooncakes sort of culturally, but also like how to make them at home. So for listeners that may never have had a mooncake, can you describe sort of what it is and also its significance?
Yeah. The mooncakes are almost always made during the Mid-Autumn Festival, although some bakeries will make it all year round if you really like it. And I would describe a Mid-Autumn Festival in a way as kind of like celebrating Thanksgiving in a lot of Asian households, where you're eating food, you're doing different ceremonies to hopefully have a really good fall harvest or end of year harvest. And actual mooncakes, there are so many different styles. I think I have 3 different styles with different fillings in the book. The type of mooncake that I grew up eating is a Cantonese style mooncake, which I like to equate to a fig Newton texture.
Oh yeah, that's
the exterior. Yeah,
that's a very good comparison.
A really dense, thick fig Newton. And so the point of a mooncake is you're meant to share them. They're circle or they're squares. Sometimes they're pressed into different animal shapes, but they're often made into molds. And it's also really sturdy because to make the mooncakes, you form a little ball of filling, whatever filling you want, wrap in your dough, and then you put it into a mooncake mold, which is almost like a plunger style. You like press it down on your counter. There's a beautiful carved design press into the mold, and then you release it, and then you have this like beautiful little pastry. So that's a classic Cantonese style mooncake.
Kristina, your book, Mooncakes and Milk Bread, is a total gift to the world. It's such a beautiful book. More people should check it out because there are some, if you don't live near a Chinese bakery, it is possible to make all these delicious things at home. Thanks for making time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me on. This was so much fun.
This episode is brought to you by King Arthur bread flour, the greatest bread flour. The secret to fluffy, high-rising buns, it's our bread flour, which has a high protein content to support strong gluten development and rise.
But bread flour isn't just for bread. It's good for cookies, like our 2024 recipe of the year for super-sized, super soft chocolate chip cookies, or chewy noodles, like the Bang Bang noodles on our site.
Or pizza. Don't forget about pizza.
Also pizza.
You can find our bread flour in stores or on our website at kingarthurbaking.com. It's time for our next segment, Ask the Bakers. For Ask the Bakers, we want to hear from you. If you have a baking question for us, head to kingarthurbaking.com/podcast to record a voice message, and we may end up using it on the show. That's kingarthurbaking.com/podcast.
And of course, if you have a baking question that simply cannot wait, you could always reach out to our Bakers hotline via phone, email, or online chat. Just go to kingarthurbaking.com/bakers-hotline. That's kingarthurbaking.com/bakers-hotline, or call us 855-371-2253. That's 2253 as in bake.
Let's hear our first question.
Hi, I had a question about making steamed buns. Sometimes when I bake them, they get wrinkly or they collapse. So I was wondering if there's any tips on ensuring a smooth and fluffy bun.
Ooh, good question. A smooth and fluffy bun, the goal of every home baker. I only recently started making steamed buns at home, because I lived in San Francisco for so long. And then I moved to Portland, Maine, where unlike Cleveland, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, there is no Chinatown to speak of. So I did start making them at home. There's 2 pain points for me. One pain point is, you fill your bun and then you sort of are pleating the dough around the filling to enclose it, right? And then you're either baking it or you're steaming it. And then I would go to steam it and it would just open up, right? Like revealing the filling. They would never stay like tightly knotted like the ones you see at the bakeries. They sort of almost like deflate and get wrinkly. So I didn't know how to solve either of these problems. But of course, Kristina Cho does. So I asked Kristina how to avoid this problem that the caller is describing of a wrinkly bun. And this is what she said.
I have one major rule. I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors that can give you a wrinkly, deflated bun. Like maybe it's overproofed or you didn't eat it long enough or whatever. Or maybe you rolled it out a little too thin when you were forming your buns. But one tip I really like to tell people is when you're steaming, you're kind of steaming at a high-ish temperature for about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the size of your bun. And wrinkliness, collapsing can often happen when there's a shock in temperature. And so if after your timer goes off at 10, 15 minutes, whatever, and you immediately open your lid, that's the shock in temperature. All of a sudden that hot air is gone and it's rapidly cooling down. So what I like to do instead of removing the lid right away is you turn off the burner and you let the steamer sit on top of your pot or whatever vessel you're using to steam for just 5 minutes. That's all you really need to kind of gradually slow it down. And that kind of helps set your dough, sets the air pocket.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oftentimes my buns kind of start to open up when they're steamed. I mean, is it just practice?
Yeah, I think it's practice is getting more comfortable with proper dough handling. One thing that you could do, are you placing your buns pinch side up or down?
I'm putting it pinch side up. Is that a mistake?
You can do either one. It's totally like a stylist. It's a stylistic choice. But if you're a little worried about your pitches or just not that pretty, just like pinch it as close as you can and then put them seam side down. And then you have a perfectly round,
yes,
little smooth buns. You can start doing that.
Hide your shame,
Plenty of buns look like that. When you're rolling out your dough and you're using hopefully a dumpling rolling pin, that's the most ergonomic, easiest one to use. But any rolling pin, I like to focus a little bit more attention on the edges of my dough so that they're thinner, so that the center of your bun dough is thicker. Yeah, and that's because when you're pinching, all that dough is being kind of compounded on each other, so you're kind of making up of that whiff. You just don't want a really thin center because that's how air escapes or it gets soggy, and then your buns just don't look as good.
So voila, problem solved. No wrinkles. No steaming apart.
No wrinkles. No coming apart at the seams.
Yeah, this is my goal for the next year.
Yeah. I missed the boat on both of those. I could have used this advice a long time ago.
I think we've got another question, though.
I'm calling because I've seen the Tanzhong method in some King Arthur recipes, and I am interested in learning more about it and why it's used.
Tanzhong. This is one of our favorite subjects at King Arthur. I feel like we talk about Tanzhong a lot because we use it a lot. We use it a lot in our recipes that we develop in our test kitchen week after week. So the Tanzhong method is closely related to a Japanese method called yukine or udine. It was popularized by Taiwanese cookbook author Yvonne Chen. And what you do basically to make a Tanzhong is you take some of the flour and some of the liquid from a bread recipe. The liquid can be milk or it can be water. And you put it in a pot and put it on the stovetop and you create a slurry with it. You cook it and then you incorporate that slurry back into the dough. And what that cooking on the stovetop does is that it pre-gelatinizes the starches in the flour, which lets the flour absorb more water. And it also gives the dough the structure to retain that water. Are you following all this? It's like, I'm so sciencey right now. But you know what? I'm not a sciencey person. And you don't really need to know the science because all you need to know really is that if you make a Tanzhong for your bread dough, the bread is going to be so fluffy, so soft. It's going to tear apart, sort of like feathery, and it's going to give it a longer shelf life, which is really interesting to me. It's sort of like how if you throw a little bit of sourdough culture into a loaf of yeasted bread, it extends the shelf life of that bread. So all in all, it's like a wonderful thing and it's very delicious. And we've been doing it at King Arthur a lot lately. We've been use it on our milk bread, which I think is the most popular use of Tanzhong, or it's the most common. Like milk bread, I feel like thanks to Kristina Cho, honestly, has kind of blown up in the past few years. And that, I think, is most people's introduction to tangyang. But you can use it in a lot of different breads. And we even used it in chocolate chip cookies for our recipe of the year, our super-sized, super soft chocolate chip cookies. So it has a real impact on your bakes, and a really good one.
It's a nice tool to have sort of like in your toolkit. And it's cool to see that it has transcended, just its role in milk breads to do all these other things, wherever you want that like longer keeping quality, you want that softness, it can be a great technique to incorporate. And I want to mention too, we have quite a few milk bread recipes on our site, but also in the Big Book of Bread, we have a classic milk bread, which is, it gets enriched. So it's a little sweet, as you said, very soft, sort of cottony, feathery. We also have a chocolate milk bread. We have a swirl milk bread, which is really fun. And then we have this, I think might be the sleeper hit of the Big Book of Bread, is the golden milk bread. I don't know if you've made that one yet, David, but it's made with coconut milk and
God, you and the
spices.
Coconut. Come on.
I know. People know just to send me like a case of, I don't know, Almond Joys or something. But that golden milk bread is really a special one. And that also uses that tangyang technique. So it's a fun one to try.
It's a really pretty bread because it has turmeric in it, just like it has the spices that you would find in golden milk, the beverage, right?
Yeah.
So it was and I think Mel developed that recipe and she put Nigella seeds on top or something.
Yeah, it's very pretty.
Really
so it's
pretty.
Like this it's a truly golden bread, but it's a great way to show off that technique too, because you just get this like real pull apart situation. So yeah, it's a fun one. I think we have one more question about roll cakes, which I'm excited to help this person solve.
Hey, King Arthur. I'm calling in because I've been trying to make a roll cake recently, but it always seems to crack. I was hoping you might have some recommendations on how to make roll cakes without them splitting. Let me know. Thanks.
This is such a classic problem.
It is such a classic problem. I feel like if you were to search for the answer, you would get 1,000 suggestions and tips. And you see these roll cakes in many Chinatown bakeries. Often they have like a black sesame, or they'll have, again, the sweetened, it's another sort of like permutation of sponge cake and cream, rolled up like that. I've seen them with like a matcha cream. People are doing all sorts of things. Of course, it's also a sponge cake, in the Western tradition is typically used to make a bûche de Noël.
Yeah.
Or a Yule log as we head into the holiday season.
Or just a jelly roll.
A jelly roll, yeah. Who makes jelly rolls anymore?
Where's the jelly roll gone?
Maybe we'll do an episode all about the jelly roll. It'll be a short episode.
That's going to be niche. Okay.
But, the sponge cake is the base of a roll cake as well, right? So it's a sponge cake that's baked in a sheet pan, and then it's turned out of the sheet pan, and then it's rolled up around a filling. Sounds easy, but so many people...
Yeah, it's not. But I just want to say, because I think the reason why this caller has this question is because the roll cakes that we're talking about are not frosted. They're not really finished with anything except maybe a dusting of powdered sugar. And that's, of course, when you want your roll cake to be perfect. Because if you're doing the bûche de Noël, you just cover it up with ganache or something. It's
there's nothing to hide your shame if you are serving a naked
right, nothing
roll
to hide
cake.
your failure. But the slice, these beautiful, perfect slices of roll cakes that you get at Chinatown bakeries are crackless. So how do we get that? How do we get there?
So crackless, I think, one thing that I will say for sure is that you have to be mindful to not overbake your sponge, right? Because a dry sponge is more likely to crack than one that's perfectly baked. So that's step one. Step one, bake a perfect cake.
Step one, just do it right.
Actually, I would say step one, make sure you've prepared your pan adequately. That's really step one. So you're going to line your pan with parchment paper and then pour in your batter. Bake your cake perfectly. So far, so good. Comes out of the oven. And I've heard all sorts of things. I've heard people say to turn it out of the pan and immediately roll it up naked with no filling in it.
And you do that in a clean towel, right? Like you dust a towel with flour or confectioner sugar
or cocoa if it's a chocolate, sponge. And I've experimented with lots of different methods, but I was curious because again, in Kristina's book, she has lots of roll cakes and has probably made more cakes in her life than I have. So I asked her what her sort of fail-proof method was. And in fact, it is a sort of hybrid of what we're describing. And this is what she had to say.
So I feel like my roll cake recipe is a little controversial because it's a little different. So I bake the cake layer, in a sheet pan. I like to put a layer of parchment paper underneath it so that it doesn't stick to the sheet pan, of course. Once it's done baking, it's really important to make sure it's like fully baked. If it's not baked, then of course it's going to stick.
Yeah.
So make sure it's really baked. The center bounces back. And I let it cool down for like 5 minutes.
Oh,
a lot of people will immediately just go in rolling.
Yeah.
And whenever I do that, the steam gets trapped in there. And then when I go to unroll, the cake cracks or it breaks. And so I let it just leave it alone for like 5 minutes while
just
it's
like the
still...
steamed buns to prevent the wrinkling.
Yeah, exactly.
Just chill.
Just leave,
5 minutes.
Just leave it alone. Walk away. And then I don't put a towel down. I know some people will like sprinkle powdered sugar or something and then and then use a kitchen towel to help them roll it. I just use the parchment paper and I use that as my assistance to just start rolling it up. And so I'm rolling it up while it's just warm, not hot. And then I just let that sit again for another 10, 15 minutes. And I rarely have my cake crack.
Tips from the master. Let it cool. Just chill, everybody. Just chill.
So the key is patience.
So I think that should help you. And if you have more problems, call the hotline. Ask them for extra tips. I think that's all of our questions for today. As always, if you have a baking question, kingarthurbaking.com/podcast. You can record it and you may be featured on a future episode. We love your questions. Keep them coming.
Every episode, we like to check in with Jessica to see what wildly surprising and full-throated ideas are in her head, a segment we lovingly call Jess-opinions. Jessica, I cannot wait to hear. What is your Jess-opinion this week?
One thing I was thinking about a lot when I was working on this episode is that there's something that I love so much about the sort of functionality of most Chinatown bakeries. And, for those of you who haven't been to a bakery in Chinatown, like you walk in and typically there's like a stack of plastic trays. And you grab a tray and you grab a set of tongs and you just go, around the room and add whatever baked good catches your eye onto your tray, and then you check out. You see it also in Latin American bakeries, but I just love the self-serve. I love wandering around. I don't feel embarrassed about how much I put on my cart. Like sometimes I get panicked. If you get up to a popular bakery that has a really long line and you haven't been able to see the full array of baked goods, the impatient queue is behind you. And then you're like, I'm finally looking for the first time. Like, I don't know. Like, and then you make like a frenzied decision. And then you're like, oh, I didn't even get that thing. Oh, I didn't see that. I feel like in a Chinatown bakery, you can take your time. You can look at things. But it really takes the pressure off because I feel like time and time again, I have gotten to the front of a line of a hot new bakery. And I will not have been able to see the things.
Right.
And then I get panicked and then I'm disappointed.
Got 30 seconds. What do you want?
Yeah. And you're like, I don't know.
I'll take it all.
So I think, more bakeries should move to the school lunch model is my opinion.
Okay. Finally. Okay. Here's the Jess-opinion. More bakeries need to move to the school lunch model.
Yes. Let us serve ourselves.
Yeah. I love this too. It is a great way to run a bakery. It's really fun for me. Yeah. It definitely inspires more pastries. I just want to fill that. I've got a tray in front of me. I got to fill it up, right?
Yeah,
I can't just
absolutely.
have one thing on the tray. It looks so lonely.
Nope. You got to fill it up.
Just pile it up. This is the very positive Jess-opinions, Jessica.
Next week, I'll be back. But in the meantime, we've got baking to do, you and I both. So what are you planning on baking this week?
Oh, I'm in a bagel place. I really want to make a good bagel at home. And it's not hard, but it's not easy. And I'm using our Baking School On Demand class that was taught by Jonathan Frischtick. What a sweet guy. What a great teacher. And his class, I was the producer on that class, so I was there when he filmed it, and I've actually watched it like twice since. It's so handy, and I'm making headway, but it's hard to know how to get the shape exactly how you want it, and there's so much experiment. And so anyway, I live across the street from the best bagel shop in New York City, and yet I want to do it myself.
Why is that your white whale? I mean, I feel like that's always that's actually why baking out of Kristina's book appealed to me so much, like I was saying, because it's hard for me to get those things. But you could just walk across the street and get yourself a bagel. But no.
Why do things the easy way?
Yeah, why do things the easy way? You could always make it harder. And that is the King Arthur way. No.
That's the David Tamarkin way.
That's the David Tamarkin way.
What are you baking this week?
It's October. I think it's go time. And
Yeah, definitely go time.
Most people are like been drinking pumpkin spice latte since August, so I may be late to the game. But we have a couple of different styles of pumpkin cookies on our site. We have these fudgy, chewy pumpkin cookies.
Those are so good.
They're so good, but they're a different beast because the ones I like, and it's inspired by like a lot of nostalgia for cookies of my youth, are this sort of cakey. They're like a muffin top almost. Like they're very soft, very cakey, pumpkin with chocolate chips in them.
They really bring me back. My mom made those cookies all the time. She frosted hers.
Oh,
Yeah.
just like a vanilla frosting?
I think it was maybe a cream cheese frosting.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes it was naked,
good.
sometimes a cream cheese frosting. But try that if you want to.
Can you ask her for her recipe?
Sure.
But in the meantime, to our listeners, thank you for tuning in and joining us here on Things Bakers Know. We are going to be back next week. And in fact, next week we are talking all about fall baking. Send us your pumpkin spice questions. Send us your apple questions.
Yeah.
Talk to us about cinnamon. We have some very provocative things to discuss.
Remember to like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And go ahead and leave us a review while you're there. Or better yet, share this episode with a friend because, as I always say, baking is more fun together.
We'll see you back here next week. In the meantime, don't forget, follow the recipes. Things Bakers Know is hosted and executive produced by me, David Tamarkin.
And me, Jessica Badalana.
Rossi Anastapoulo is our senior producer. Chad Chennai is our producer, and Marcus Bagala is our engineer. Original music by Megan and Marcus Bagala. This episode featured cookbook author Kristina Cho. You can learn more about her work and her cookbooks at her website, eatchofood.com. That's EATCHOFOOD.com. Things Bakers Know is a King Arthur Baking Company podcast.